Manel, welcome. And today we're going to go over a bunch of stuff and talk about all things branding and marketing. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about, who you are, your agency, and your experience with Facebook ads.
All right, good to be here, Callum. Thanks for the invite. So my name is Manuel. I've had a digital marketing agency mostly focused on e-com for the last 4 years. I started way back when I was around 17 with drop shipping, which led me to then work at Vans, the skating company here in Portugal, as well as Herschel Supply and other brands that are not as big like Brixton, Ryan, and Rhythm. I did that for 2 years, and then I kind of went off my own thing, working with software as a company, eventually starting my own agency focusing on e-commerce for a lot of verticals, but fashion brands is definitely one of our typical clients.
So since, this year, it's been a bit of a crazy time. Facebook's made a lot of changes. You've got the iOS update. What have you seen the transition been like through this year? And, if you're advising someone who's starting a brand, would you say that creative is now the most important aspect? Or would you say it's still, heavily based on audience testing and having lots of different ad sets and lots of different audiences to test?
Well, I'll answer your question in two parts, right? The first one is definitely iOS crashed a lot of brands. A lot of brands were, maybe struggling with 2 ROAS on the platform, and when iOS came, they were at 1. And at that point, it's not sustainable anymore for a lot of brands, right? One of the things that we did see with a lot of our clients is really defaulting to what we call MER or blended ROAS. MER stands for marketing efficiency rate, and blended ROAS is pretty much how many sales are you getting for how much spend, right? And you're going to measure the ROAS from that. Granted, if you're doing email and that sort of stuff, those values are also going to get pushed in there. But if like a lot of companies, 95% of your revenue comes, or at least 95% of your new customers are coming from Facebook, then it gives you a better idea of how important the platform is for your business. Other than that, I can also share that for a lot of businesses, we looked at core metrics like cost per click, click-through rate. The boring metrics of 2004 are now super important, because if you can make the simple math of, okay, I'm paying X for click, my click-through rate is this, and my conversion rate on the website is this, then you can safely spend that amount of money, even ignoring CPA completely, because you know that the math holds up to the other metrics that you already have. So focus on core metrics is a great way to pivot from the crash that iOS 14 is causing.
Interesting. And in terms of then, like I said, creative versus, audience testing, which one would you now, because, now a lot of media buyers and friends and colleagues and stuff I've spoken to have been more about, okay, just run broad level CBO and then dial it in with your creative. What would you say to that? Would you say that creative is really, really the key, and that's the way to differentiate yourself? Or would you say that you still need to test a hell of a lot of audiences?
I would say it depends on the level you are. So to quote a good friend of mine, Jordan Menard, he's one of the best copywriters in the space for Facebook ads. He said, good media buying will get you from 10,000 to 50,000 spend, but then after 50,000, it's really is creative. So what I would say is, if you're still spending a low amount, maybe 10,000 a month, 50,000, some brands are not even there, right? 5,000 a month. I would say 1,000 a month, right? It's different realities. At that point, you still have a lot of audience testing to do, because the amount of money that you spend on each audience with $1,000 per month budget is not enough to draw a conclusion whether that audience works or not. So at that point, you have both factors. You have creative and you have audiences. What I would say there, you could ask, well, Manel, I can really only focus on one because my budget is so small. If I test audiences and creative, well, for a lack of a better word, I'm fucked, right? Yeah. So what I would say there is creative trumps everything. And that specific point, creative trumps everything. But for a fashion brand, it's also very important to realize that creative is very important, but perhaps even more important than that creative is the offer and the angle that sits on that creative. And we've seen brands being built off of this, like L'Étrange London, right? We've seen Represent Clothing. We've seen I Love Ugly. Yep. A lot of these good brands, but they came up because of one good product or one aesthetic, right? It's one good angle. It's not about the creative as much as it is about that product or that angle. right?
Yep. And then how they wrapped the creative around that.
Exactly.
Right. So what would be the first steps that a brand would need to do to work with a media buyer, like your agency, for example?
Mm-hmm. It definitely depends on the level of the brand, the current spend, right? For a new brand, you've never spent $1 on Facebook ads. The reality is we would probably say, hey, you should probably run your tests first, learn a bit of Facebook ads, and then come back to us when you've spent some money. Because the reality is, if you watch a couple of YouTube videos, you can build a solid campaign structure to spend maybe $500 to $1,000 a month. You don't need an expert to do that. In fact, experts will actually charge you triple or more of that. So you're better off spending your own money. If you still want to work with us and you're a new brand, we'd probably audit your project. So we'd see the fundamentals behind it, what kind of product. We would search up your competitors. We'd see what types of ads they're running. And then we would propose a campaign structure, which is nothing too complex. People they kind of make this idea of marketing has to be super highly complex to work. Well, Facebook ads is very simple in nature. In fact, Facebook is working to make it more and more simple for newcomers, right? So what I would say there is we do the audit for your brand, we search up competitors, we come up with a campaign structure, make sure that your funnel is working right. And for e-commerce, so that's not too complex again. It's just making sure that you get to purchase and potentially creating some post-purchase flows as well. And lastly, we would look at your email just to make sure that, especially with iOS 14, your LTV is being as maxed out as possible. Because even if we're bringing new customers through paid media, that means nothing if they're not converting or if they're not spending more as time goes by. So that was the first scenario for a new brand. If you're already an established brand, you're spending maybe anywhere between $50,000 to $500,000 per month on Facebook ads, then it's completely different because we already have the data. So we would look into your Facebook ads. We run a complete audit, see where we can improve. And the reality is we always run an audit before working with clients because we don't want to make the mistake of, okay, let's work with you. And then we find out that the account is okay. And at that point, we're doing a disservice to the client, right? So we always make sure, can we improve this account? And if yes, how? So the process, it comes from an audit. We say, this is where we're going to improve. This is where you need to improve. And then it's up to the client whether he wants to work with us or not. But after that value is delivered, most clients want to work with us just because they see, okay, these guys know what they're doing.
Got it. And if I'm a new brand and I don't have the cash to spend, and let's say I don't want to learn Facebook ads myself, like I'm not going to go and watch YouTube tutorials, for example, what would you recommend then? Should I, is there another option? Is it like a freelancer on Upwork, or is it like, what would you recommend in that scenario? You can be honest.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I would honestly say, don't start a brand. I'm 100% serious. If you don't want to learn the fundamentals of the business you're getting into, then don't start a brand. Because when you do sign up with an agency, they can tell you anything they want and you'll believe it because they're considered the authority in that relationship. If you don't know how your business works, then how can you possibly hire someone to work on your business? It doesn't work that way.
Should people be doing broad targeting or diving into more specific interest groups, like when they're starting out, low spend, 1,000 to 5,000 a month?
If you have the budget to spend and test both, always test both. There's no secret formula. I'm not going to say broad targeting works 100% of the time. The fact is, over this last year of 2021, broad targeting has performed extremely well for, I would say, up to 75% of our clients. But there is the other percentage where interest-based ad sets have performed better. What we've seen kind of go down in performance is the lookalike ad sets, but definitely interest ad sets after iOS 14, if anything, have gained more relevancy towards broad targeting. So I'd say right now, if your budget allows for it, test broad. If your budget doesn't allow for it and you have a smaller budget, I would start with interest-based groups. And the reason for this is broad targeting requires a lot of budget and a lot of time to truly optimize. So if you're spending $5,000 a month, right? And $2,000 of that value is going into a broad targeting. You'll probably take maybe 2 to 3 months just to get a solid understanding of how well that CBO, right, that campaign budget optimization campaign is going to perform. And this is where most people kind of fumble with the math is if I have one CBO and I'm testing 3 ad sets inside that CBO, and we're looking usually between 2 to 4 ad sets within a CBO, and then I have ideally 3 to 4 ads or 1 dynamic creative, then you have to make up the math of, okay, if I want 1 ad to give me at least 10 purchases, how much is that going to cost? Okay, now I have to multiply it by 4, and now I have to multiply that value by 4 again, and that's going to give you the minimum value that you need to spend on the CBO just to have a grasp of if it's going to work or not. Whereas interest groups and also ad budget optimization can work a little bit better for smaller budgets just because you have a bit more of control and you get feedback from the spend quicker.
Makes total sense. Makes total sense. I think that's really, really a great, like the way that you broke it down in terms of like, okay, there's going to be 4 ad sets, you know, this is the spend, this is how I want 10 purchases from this. I think that's super valuable. With the new iOS update, do you recommend retargeting for fashion brands?
100%. In fact, retargeting is where most of the money is right now. A lot of people can say, well, you know, I lost my data. I can't retarget iOS or I can't retarget. Well, what you're forgetting there, if you have that argument, because this argument doesn't exist in higher spend, you need retargeting every single time, right? But at a lower budget, you can potentially say, well, retargeting is actually costing me more. But those are customers that already engage with you. So if the CPC is higher, sure, but they've already been introduced to your brand. So what is the likelihood of a customer that's already been introduced to your brand to purchase if they add it to cart or if they went all the way to checkout versus someone who never heard of you? Of course, I'm going to bet on the guy that already heard about me. The potential mistake that a lot of brands make is they don't have suitable offers for retargeting. So their message is the same for cold, right? People who never heard of them, as for warm. And this doesn't work because what you have to consider is if someone is here and they didn't purchase, there's a reason for it. And usually we base that out of value. So the product could be too expensive, in which case we give a discount. Out of time, they didn't have time to complete the purchase, in which case we say, hey, you forgot this, like would you, and you can do this via ads as well as email, right? Email is probably the core where this happens, but ads are valuable here as well. You have social proof, right? Perhaps they got cold feet at checkout. How can we actually backtrack from that? Let's give them testimonials. Let's show them video testimonials. In the case of fashion brands, let's show them style guides. Let's show them people wearing our product, right? And lastly, shipping. Shipping is a very big thing, especially because brands have, you know, free shipping over $60, over $70. But what we forget as well is if I'm being introduced to a new brand, maybe I don't want to make that sort of big commitment where I order 3 pieces. Maybe I just want 1. And allowing for free shipping on that first purchase can go a very, very long way, creating that LTV, right? The lifetime value of the customer. The customer's just going to come back and come back and come back. Whereas if you don't give free shipping for that one first purchase that they have, especially if your brand is built off of one product, then you're already shutting down the door for that specific customer.
Yeah, spot on. Makes total sense, man. I think as well, just to be clear, you know, LTV being lifetime value, right? Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the time it's easy to, me and you, we can use these different sayings like CBO and LTV and something, but I think a lot of the time people are like, LTV, what is that? So yeah, LTV being lifetime value and it being, you know, important to, particularly I think in e-com, that 90-day LTV, right? Is like trying to, because cash flow is king. And if you don't have cash flow, you know, it doesn't matter, you could be highly profitable as a brand, but if you don't have that cash to reinvest to buy stock, you know, so shortening that LTV as well is really, really important.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when a new fashion brand comes to you, you know, and they're like, hey, I want to work with you, what's the first things that they need to have down? Like they need these key assets. Like what are they for you?
I would say the minimum you need is, number one, a working website. And if you're a fashion brand, I was going to say you need a beautiful website, but at least you need an aesthetically pleasing website, a website that matches your brand, right? You need that to happen. So number one, functioning website. Usually we work with Shopify all the time, so I think that is potentially the best solution nowadays. You need content. You need photos. It can't be just product photos. If you only have product photos, you can't do paid media. You need lifestyle photos. Ideally, you have some UGC. A great example, a great story to actually mention here is Acne Studios, right? What a lot of people don't know about Acne Studios is the way they grew was through community. They made like 100 pairs, they shared them over the community, it started becoming a staple, and that's how they kind of got the buzz out. If you did the same with your product, then you're getting lifestyle photos, you're getting UGC before you step into the paid media, because paid media is going to amplify the work that you already did, right? So if you already have a good website, good content, ideally you have already some sort of community behind your brand. You're not launching your brand through paid media. You already have some people who believe it, some people who trust it, some people are wearing it day to day. I would say those three are the main components. And then of course you need a good grasp of, well, not a good grasp, because it's hard to have a good grasp of your financials at the start. You don't know how much money you're gonna spend, but you definitely need to have testing budget. You need to have money that you're gonna say, I'm gonna put this into paid media, I'm gonna test multiple ad sets to see what works, and be ready to lose that money, honestly. Because out of potentially 5 angles that you're gonna test, 1 is gonna work. And that's gonna create the path that you're gonna follow to profitability. But you're gonna lose the money on the others. And it's just the way it is. Without testing, you'll never know.
Makes total sense. Would you say that the brand needs to have like a rough idea of their audience as well before they come to you?
Yes. Yes and no. Yes, it's really good to have competitors, references, so we can take a look at their ads. We can see how they're doing things. Competitors are much more important than actual audiences, because the problem with audiences is, and a lot of times from small to big clients, we see this happen all the time. They come to us and they say, we know our audience is, single women 35 to 45, and they like these brands, super segmented, super narrow. That doesn't work on Facebook. In fact, a good audience on Facebook has at least 2 million people in it. So if you start thinking about niches, is 2 million still a niche? For us as marketers, yes, it is, because we realize the amount of people there is. But if you start talking about potential, a few years ago, people who liked a Palace or Diamond or et cetera, would be 2 million? Probably not. Especially on Facebook likes, people who like those brands on Facebook or interact, smaller than that. And as you mentioned before, broad targeting is performing really, really well. So the larger our funnel is, the better. So I would say, yes, you can come with references, competitor references. You can come with a grasp of what you think the audience is. But the moment you start limiting the testing because you really believe that audience is the only one that's going to purchase, then you're setting yourself up for failure. Because the broader you try to target, the more likelihood you'll have of succeeding.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point, what you just said. And when I first started a brand, I think that one of the questions I had in my mind was, what should that audience size be? So, you mentioned as a marketer, you want an audience size on Facebook of at least 2 million. So where did that number come from? And, what happens if you go smaller than that? And why can't you go smaller than that? And what happens if you go much broader than that and bigger than that?
That's a great question. It's not an exact science. The reason for the 2 million, it comes from our experience with brands across multiple brands. And we kind of noticed that's kind of the sweet spot. Audiences that have less than 2 million usually perform worse than those. So the sweet spot that we found was between 2 to 10 million. And alongside this insight as well, a lot of the people that I know in the industry are pointing at least a couple million of people in that ad set. It doesn't mean that you can't be profitable with an audience of 100,000. The problem is you're going to saturate the audience much quicker. For retargeting, that's completely fine, right? Especially retargeting takes a little bit longer to develop. But we have to see that the way Facebook works is if you give Facebook an audience of 10 million, right? Let's say 10 million. Facebook is first going to test your ad in 2 million of those people, 20%. If you're lucky, if your account is performing well, it's going to test your ad in 20%. And if 20% of that audience that you're testing, Facebook says this ad is doing well, we want to show it to more people, it's going to increase. So now we have to think, okay, what if I have 100K? Okay, then my ad is going to be shown to 20,000 people. Now I ask the question, if I show your ad to 2 million versus 20,000 people, do you think that you'll have more negative opinions or more positive opinions in which area, right? 2 million. So the bigger your audience, the more chance you'll have to succeed, just because there's more room for people to have positive reactions to your ad and for Facebook to see, okay, this is an ad I want to show to people. It's very important to realize and always keep in mind, Facebook is a platform that wants to keep the users inside the platform. So they need to show content that the users like and engage with. That's why if your ad is garbage, your profitability is going to be garbage. So you have to build for the platform.
So when you first work with a new brand, like what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see brands make in the early days?
For fashion brands, it's usually having too narrow of a scope. The problem or the situation that I see mostly with fashion brands nowadays is it comes from creative people, which is amazing. You know, creative people, I love them. But they usually forget the part of the business. They need to make money so the creativity can be fueled. And I think it was the CEO of I Love Ugly. He wrote an entire thing about this, on how you start off as a creative, but then you need to kind of give into that business aspect. So a lot of people will start their brand thinking, this is my brand, this is my audience, I'm not gonna let go of this, and I'm not willing to test other approaches. And when you do that, you're already, again, setting yourself up for failure, because you're gonna get stuck on that. To give you a really accurate example, I had this consulting call with a new fashion brand. And the whole purpose that they wanted to do is, it was going to be an ethical fashion brand, sustainable. They were going to give back money on every purchase. And I had this conversation with them, and I noticed that their financials didn't make any sense, because they were actually losing money every time they sold something. And I told them, well, if your CPA is for some reason $10 as you're starting, which is very hard to do as a new brand, then you're still losing money. And they realized this, and 2 weeks later, they sent me a message saying, hey, thank you so much for your help. Actually, we've decided to close the brand. Because at least they realized that, okay, the finances that we have, the current business model that we have is not sustainable in the long run. This audience that we chose, this product that we chose is not sustainable in the long run. And especially for fashion brands, you really need something that makes you stand out, right? Something that's timeless. Or if you're a t-shirt or a hoodie brand, which was this case, tied to a cause, well, there's plenty of that, right? So I think the best thing you can do as a creative that's launching a fashion brand is really having the same freedom of thought you have towards your work to business and paid media. Don't be siloed into one way of thinking. Be willing to test, be willing to see multiple different angles for your brand.